The best weapon you can have in the Prohibition War is your mind. Fill your head with the knowledge you need by checking out this latest entry in the Russ Belville Show's Reformer's Reader.
All right, welcome back, everybody, and really excited to have our next guest on the program. It is Ivan Goldman. He's the author of a book called Sick Justice, and given some of the stories we've been covering here on 420 Radio, we couldn't have had a better guest to get on here. Ivan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russ. Good to be here.
So glad to have you here. You know, the scandals that I'm referring to, of course, when we talk about the drug war, the most recent one to get ink in the New York Times and other papers, Reuters reported that the DEA was passing along all this spy information to local cops, and then local cops were covering up the original source of the tips in the investigation. Can you tell us how this drug war policing works and how they've been getting away with that for so long?
Well, some of this, a lot of this comes from the Patriot Act, which was passed very quickly. And another thing that's going on in that Patriot Act, by the way, is it allows the feds to do what they call a black bag search. That's when they go into your home and look around, open your drawers, your medicine cabinet, look for stuff, see what you got, and then cover it all back up again, so you don't know they were there. And the Patriot Act gave them the right to do this, and it turns out that something like about 99% of these black bag searches, and there have been hundreds, had to do with drugs. They had nothing to do with terrorism. Terrorism was less than 1%. So it all just ties together. When they get more power, they use it, and they're often using it in their cockamamie war on drugs.
Well, even before the passage of the Patriot Act, the war on drugs has been used to decimate civil liberties, especially our Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. You make note of the fact we've got 2.3 million people behind bars, 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners. How much of that owes to prisons and policing for profit?
Well, you can't separate it, but there is a very large active lobby in favor of locking people up. There's money in it. It's not just the private prisons. They have only a small part of it, but all prisons have what they call vendors. People bringing in candy bars and people handling the telephones for the prisoners, for which they pay roughly 10 times as much for a long-distance call as just about anybody else. And the prison guards, the bailiffs, the judges, the prosecutors, there are just thousands and thousands of people living off the war on drugs. And about half of our prisoners are in there for drug-related offenses. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but one thing we should always remember is if there's no victim, there probably wasn't a crime, and that's a good thing for us to remember.
Well said. We're speaking with Ivan Goldman. He's the author of Sick Justice, Inside the American Gulag. It's available from Potomac Books and University of Nebraska Press. You can check out PotomacBooksInc.com for some information. And the other big story having to do with our sick justice system was Attorney General Eric Holder in a speech to the American Bar Association calling for reforms that might alleviate some of the mandatory minimum sentencing that goes on in these drug crimes. Do you take Holder at his word, given his previous promises on not enforcing medical marijuana laws and such?
Well, I'm going to take it as a good sign. You know, I was against the Iraq War, and a lot of people didn't figure out they were against the Iraq War until it had gone on, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And then there were some people who said, no, they're no good. They were for the war, now they're against it. And I said, and I say now, if you want to join my side, you are welcome. And if Eric Holder really means it, that's great. But I would point out that he's been the Attorney General for 5 years. During the 5 years, he's prosecuted thousands and thousands of people in the war on drugs, and two bankers. And the two bankers he just charged, I think it was today or yesterday, for bringing down the world economy and and taking away the jobs, the homes, and the pensions of millions of people. Two prosecutions. But in the war on drugs, untold thousands.
I'm coming to you today. I'm on tour. I'm in Miami Springs, Florida, and just a couple of miles away is the Miami-Dade Correctional Facility, their county jail. And there was a story that came up on the local news where the guards apparently allowed these doors to simultaneously open in the maximum security unit, so 3 gang members could go attack one of their enemies. He jumped off a balcony so that he could save himself, breaking his back and his ankle in the process. And that just leads me to ask, how much can you tell us about the corruption that this over-incarceration and this drug war has wrought inside our prisons and inside our police forces?
Well, again, it's you can't measure it, but it's just huge. You take somebody who's nonviolent and hasn't committed a crime that has any victim, and you put him in prison with psychopaths, and he learns all the wrong lessons. He learns how to survive through violence and lying and just he doesn't learn how to survive by doing nice things. People who survive prison rather well don't make for good citizens. And guards all across America, we know this, we see this over and over, like this ugly story you're telling from Florida, where the guards sort of just let the worst of the worst dominate the prison. And why? Because they figured that will make the guards safer. If we throw them, a bone, someone to pick on, someone to beat up, someone to rape, they won't bother us so much. And that's how it works.
Yeah, that's just obscene. There's another point you make in this book, Sick Justice Inside the American Gulag, that I think is kind of the hidden side of this war on drugs, and it has to do with the mentally ill and how in the early 80s we saw the Reagan administration have mass closings of facilities for the mentally ill. At about the same time, we see an uptick in the imprisonment for drug crimes. So how can we address this mental health crisis, and how much does it play into this over-incarceration?
Well, it also plays into the war on drugs, because a lot of these people who are mentally ill are self-medicating with something, and because they can't get treatment. If you think about it, we probably all know people who looked for treatment for something. Maybe it was substance abuse, maybe it was schizophrenia, and if you don't have money, you can't find the treatment. But there's always a jail cell open. You ever notice that?
Mm-hmm.
When they make an arrest, they don't say, well, hell, we don't have room in the jail, we're going to let you go home. No, they take you to jail. There's always a jail cell open. And so it is all related. It's just what we have is it's a punitive society. But Americans aren't really all that ugly and punitive, but somehow we've allowed this structure to build itself and maintain itself, and the people who are suffering from it are largely people we don't see because they're behind walls.
Yeah, it's just a shame, the warehousing of so many mentally ill people, poor people, so many minorities that is now just becoming clearer and clearer to even people in the mainstream. Some of these racial disparities were just pointed out today in a decision by a New York federal judge on NYPD's practice of stop and frisk being disproportionately and constitutionally unfair to minorities. Tell us what you've learned in researching your book about this racial disparity in our prison systems.
Well, the blacks and Hispanics are way, way overrepresented in prison. Now, a lot of people would say, well, they have more criminals. But as you know, in the stop and frisk, the good thing is we have a lot of good statistics, and we know that minorities are no more likely to be smoking marijuana than anybody else. It's pretty much throughout our culture, but blacks are something like 8 times more likely to be pulled over on suspicion of drugs than whites. So clearly, there's something wrong there, and there's a lot of racial discrimination in the whole system.
All right, we've got to wrap up, but the book again is Sick Justice: Inside the American Gulag. And one last question, Ivan Goldman, as you were researching the book, I mean, you and I and a lot of our audience are pretty well educated on this issue of drug war and imprisonment. Did you find any statistic or study or story that really caught you by surprise or shocked you?
Yeah, Atiba Parker. What's Eric Holder going to do about Atiba Parker? He's doing time in Mississippi. He's doing 42 years for a very, very small quantity of drugs. It was crack, which I admit, about as much as you would find in a sugar packet. He's doing 42 years, and he is mentally ill. He's been diagnosed as mentally ill. So what are we going to do about guys like him? He's in his 20s. I'm not going to do the math, but he's going to be there a long, long time. He's not a dangerous guy. And I want to say one more thing. I'm talking about Atiba Parker because this is one of many, many people who was drawn into committing what authorities call a crime. In other words, he was a guy who was doing drugs, self-medicating, and he ran into a police informant who coerced him, who bugged him, who said, come on, sell me some stuff. I need stuff. I need marijuana. I need crack. I'll buy all you've got. And another thing they do is they make sure the sale occurs within 2 blocks of a school. That makes it. That means they can put them away for longer. So somebody ought to ask Mr. Holder what he's going to do about Atiba Parker, because we have a lot of Atiba Parkers. We have, he's just one guy I know about. But when you have 2.3 million stories, there are a lot of stories like Atiba Parker.
Yeah, too many. And thank you for telling us the story of Atiba Parker. The book is Sick Justice: Inside the American Gulag.
The Russ Belville Show. Chat is for friends 18 and older.
Automation software went crazy on me there. Sorry for the blast of sound there, Ivan, and thanks for joining us. All right, when we come back, we'll have time for a radical